Good evening, everyone. I can't tell you how much it means for me to be standing before you tonight. First of all, let me just say something about my appearance tonight. I want to note that I don't normally dress this way on Wednesday evening. Brandon, most of you don't either, obviously. But I got to thinking today, and I thought, it might be good, this being the first night of the gospel meeting and everything, to dress in such a way as to let folks know that I am the preacher, I am someone who does this on a regular basis, because once I start talking, it will be much harder to convince you of that fact. So I think this will be a good start to things this evening. But it is so very good to be with you. I am inexpressibly grateful for the opportunity to come and be among the family at Loudon once again. I have missed you, and I have to say, and I have to admit, I knew I would miss you. I've missed you more than I thought I would. And it is such a blessing to be back among you this evening and to have even just a few days to worship together and study together and encourage one another in this most holy faith. Thank you, Nick. They have to do that back in Tallahassee with me as well. But it does mean an awful lot for us to be here. And it's been a good day already. We had the opportunity to have lunch with Mike and Debbie this afternoon and then supper with Jim and Sarah. Looking forward to seeing more of all of you as the week goes on. But we do want to go ahead and address the subject that we've come to study this week. We're talking about eternity this week. And really, the lessons are designed to help us develop an eternal mindset and get us to thinking about eternity. Tonight's study is primarily introductory in nature. I'm basically just going to give you some thoughts, share some thoughts with you, and introduce some concepts and ideas that we will be able to build upon as the week goes on. And it is my intention that each succeeding lesson this week will build on the one just prior to it. And within each lesson, I hope that we'll be able to build on the thoughts as well. So, and I also want to note, for those who may be visiting, who may not be as familiar with groups like this one, but with regard to the material I intend to present, it has been compiled. It will be presented with the assumption that the Bible is correct on any subject that it addresses, including this one that we're dealing with this week. And if that assumption is an issue for you, I would love to talk to you about it. I would love to have the opportunity to talk to you about why I believe that the Bible is a reliable source of information as far as being a message from God, and any member of this church would as well, I'm sure. But we are going to go on that major underlying assumption with regard to these studies, that the information that the Bible provides on this subject is reliable, is accurate, has in fact come from our omniscient God. Quite frankly, if we can't refer to the Bible on this subject, I really don't know what else we can look to, where else we can go to for good information on the subject of eternity. And so as we begin this evening, I couldn't help but get to thinking over the last few minutes, actually, as I was able to get here a few minutes early and visit with some of you and catch up with some of you shortly before the service began. And I was thinking about it, and I'm still thinking about how happy it makes me to see the faces of so many people that me and my family love as much as we love you. But I got to tell you, I also can't help but think of the faces of other people that I would love to see, but cannot. I think about Jim and Joanne. I think about Vola. I think about Billy. I still have on my phone a voicemail. I played it for Tanya just today. A voicemail that I saved from several years ago. Billy Hoover singing happy birthday to me on my phone. It's priceless to me. But I think about that. I don't see him here tonight, or any of the others that I just mentioned. They've all moved on. And thinking about them now serves to lead into the subject that we're going to address over the next few days. In Genesis chapter 5 and verse 25, it is written there, Genesis 5 and 25, Methuselah lived 187 years and begot Lamech. After he begot Lamech, Methuselah lived 782 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. Methuselah is a name that is familiar to many people, maybe even not many people that are not as familiar with the Bible as many of us are. But he's familiar and remembered as the man with the longest recorded lifespan in history. 969 years. 969 trips he made around the sun. That's a long time. But what was that last thing that was written about him again in that passage we just read? At the end of verse 27, and he died. And there are several other men mentioned in that genealogy of Genesis 5 who lived many years beyond what any of us can reasonably expect today, and quite frankly, beyond what I want to live today. But the same thing is said about each and every one of them. And he died. Nobody stays here forever. Nobody lives on earth forever. Have you ever thought about the fact that the vast majority of all the people who have ever lived on this earth have already died? You know, from what I have read, demographers have estimated that over the last 6,000 years, about 100 billion people have lived on earth. Is that number completely accurate? I don't know. I'm sure there are some assumptions that are made in arriving at that number that might be debatable. But it's been a lot of people. And I would say that even a fraction of that number would put it north of the present population of the world, which is, I believe, around 7 billion people. Early on, very early on, the number of those who were living on earth exceeded the number of those who died. Now, that didn't last for very long. The day has long since passed since the number of those who died have passed the number of those who still live here on earth. And barring some unnaturally large baby boom, the number of those who died will continue to exceed those who live on earth from now on. Life on earth, as we've already noted, does not go on forever. But that does not mean that life itself does not go on forever. Quite frankly, it does. Those who have departed the flesh, who have departed this world and this life, have not ceased to exist. It is not a case that they are no more. Now, I know that there are those in this world who believe that is the case, that there is no life beyond the grave, that there is no resurrection of that. There have always been people that believe that, unfortunately. I can look through this audience, and knowing so many of you, I know we got a lot of good Bible students here. And I know that several of you will recall that there was a sect of the Jews around during the ministry of Jesus that was known for this, that was known for not believing in angels or spirits or the resurrection of the dead. That's sad, you see. They were known as the Sadducees, of course. But in Matthew chapter 22, shortly before the crucifixion, Jesus was questioned by some Sadducees about the resurrection, asking, quite frankly, kind of a silly question about a woman being married in the resurrection. But in Matthew chapter 22 and verse 31, Jesus tells them that concerning the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was spoken to you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And among other things that we might take away from this statement, it is evident Abraham still lives. Because God is still the God of Abraham. And God, as Jesus said, is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And you know, at the time that Jesus said these words, it had been a couple of thousand years since Abraham had died and been buried by Ishmael and Isaac. It had already been a couple of thousand years since Abraham was died. But Jesus said he still lived. It's been a couple of more thousand years now. And I'll tell you, Abraham still lives. Just not here. Where does he live then? What is the state of his existence now that his earthly existence has ended? Well, Abraham has entered eternity. And at this point, it's probably a good idea to take note of the definition of eternity. According to Google AI, eternity has reference to infinite time or a state of existence that never ends. By the way, I'll throw in as well, this definition went on to state that colloquially, the word describes any period of time that feels immeasurably long or endless, like many people feel about my presentations, no doubt. Anyway, we see from this that the term eternity has reference to something that doesn't end, that goes on forever. And in this context, it has reference to a state of existence that never ends. I mean, obviously, we exist now, but we do not exist forever in our current state. Remember the words of the psalmist in the 90th Psalm. Psalm 90 and verse 10, where he writes, "The days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength they are 80 years, yet their boast is only labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away." Of course, the psalmist is making reference to our earthly lives, the time that we spend here on earth. We get about 70 years. Or if we are strong, and maybe kind of fortunate, depending on how you look at things, we get 80 years. Sometimes longer than that. Many of you remember my father. He will turn 95 in a few months. But 70 or 80 years is what we're looking at. By the way, that made me curious, actually. The other day I got to looking at that. And as I read that again, I got to thinking, there are several countries nowadays, and particularly it seems in Scandinavia and Asia, with life expectancies, average life expectancies north of 80 years. But I got curious to say, okay, well, what if we factor in the worldwide average life expectancy? Because then you've got a lot of countries with much lower life expectancies. And it was interesting to me that the worldwide life expectancy among all humanity in 2026, about 73 years. And the psalmist got it right. We get a few decades here. And then our body of flesh dies. Of course, we get a lot more time here than a lot of created creatures of this earth, don't we? Bless their hearts. I love my dogs. They only get about a dozen years. But that reminds me that it is a general truth that everything that lives on earth eventually dies on earth. Like us, every other created being, every earth creature eventually dies. We share that attribute, we share that reality with everything else that lives on this planet, everything else that lives here. But unlike those other creatures that we might look at, there is more to us than just this life. There is more to us than just the flesh. We are unique among creation. We are the climax of creation. We see that uniqueness at the very beginning. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26. After every other being, after every other living thing on earth has already been created, we read in Genesis 1 and 26, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them." Unlike anything else that God made at the beginning, you and I are created in his very image, the image of God. By the way, that does not mean we look like God. As Jesus said, God is a spirit. And as Jesus also said, a spirit does not have flesh and bones. Now, to be created in the image of God refers to the nature of our being. even while we remain in the flesh, quite frankly. Because we have that spiritual component, we have that eternal component that sets us apart from the rest of creation. I believe Anthony in his prayer referred to us as eternal creatures. I really like that. But that sets us apart. This is an attribute that God has given us that, quite frankly, we share with Him. Now, of course, where God is concerned, He is without beginning or end. Remember how He identified Himself to Moses. When Moses said, "Who shall I say sent me to you?" I am that I am. Tell them that I am has sent you. And of course, what that tells me is God just simply is. He is. He is the self-existent one who had no beginning and who will have no end. In Isaiah chapter 57 and verse 15, the prophet there notes that the Lord inhabits eternity. And I'm sure many here are familiar with Peter's words in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8, where he notes that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is 1 day. And I think you need to take the second passage there in light of the first one. Because there are those that believe that we can take that statement from Peter and we use it as kind of a conversion table, to convert God time to man time and back and forth. No, that's not what the Lord is telling us here. That's not what Peter's telling us. The point Peter is making here, and keep in mind, in that chapter, Peter is responding to people that say, well, Jesus must not be going to come back. He must not going to be keeping that promise of returning because it's been like 30 years since he left and he hadn't come back yet. And Peter's responding to that. And of course, the point Peter is making in this context is that to an eternal God, time and the passage of time is meaningless because He is eternal, because of His eternal nature. That is the nature of God's existence. It is an eternal nature. And as incredible and as amazing as it is to think that we could share anything in common with God, we share this with Him because He shared it with us. Now, unlike Him, of course, we had a beginning, each of us did. But like Him, we will have no end. The state of existence that we are presently in is a temporary one. We are not. Because we are at our core spirit beings housed in bodies of flesh for a time. Later on, we're going to be given another body that will never die. But for now, we're housed in these bodies of flesh. And one day, our existence will change and it will become as His. As John would tell us, we will be like Him. Now, we don't know a whole lot else beyond that. John says as much, but we know that much. And one thing that I hope that everyone here will have a better appreciation and awareness of after these studies is that eternity is in the future of everyone here. Everyone out there as well. So it's a subject that merits our attention. And I really believe that on some level, perhaps deeply buried within many, but I really believe that everyone, if you dig deep enough, instinctively knows there must be more than just this. That we don't cease to exist just because our flesh dies. Makes me think of the words of Solomon in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 11, where he writes that He has made everything beautiful in its time, and He has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. I believe God put that awareness, though again, many try to suppress it and suppress that truth and bury it. But it suggests to me that God wants us thinking about eternity. Even as we go from day to day, meeting our responsibilities in this life, as we must, we need to be thinking about it. The notion of continuing on after the flesh dies is more than just an intuition or a feeling. I believe it is a spark of the Creator that exists in all who have been made in His image. It is reality. In Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 13, it is written that no creature is hidden from God's sight, but all things are naked and open to the eyes of Him to whom we must give account. Now, some of you may recall that I read and I study and I preach from the New King James translation. That's just what I do. This is one of the very few times that I actually like the old King James rendering better. And it's not a translation issue, it's just I like the way it reads better. In the old King James, this verse is rendered, "Neither is there any creature that is not manifest in his sight, but all things are naked and open to the eyes of him with whom we have to do." I like the way that reads. I like the way it sounds. It sounds almost like he's saying, him with whom we have to deal. And we really do. We all have to deal with God at some point, don't we? We can deal with him now, or we can deal with him later. But I thought of that verse because it's a truth regarding eternity as well. We've got to deal with eternity. At some point, we can note that we have to deal with eternity. Certainly, when our time here is at an end, we will have to deal with it. And our time here will come to an end. And of course, for that matter, time itself will come to an end eventually. And thinking about that, one of the things that I find fascinating about the creation of the heavenly bodies that we are all familiar with, the sun, the moon, the stars, I'm fascinated by what is said about the creation of these items in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 4. In Genesis 1 and 4, or 14 actually, Moses writes there, "Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and for years." One of the purposes for which God created the heavenly bodies was to help us mark time. And you know, to this day, we've got the same heavenly bodies that are spoken of in Genesis 1. To this day, people who study such things, unlike me, but they can go out there and they can look, they can tell you what time of year it is by the way the stars are positioned in the sky. Or they can tell you how long it will be for another month to begin by the phase of the moon. And of course, the sun tells us when it's day. And when it's not there, we know it's night. I find that to be fascinating. Not enough to learn a whole lot more about it, but I do find that to be fascinating. But with that in mind, again, I would refer over to 2 Peter. We're going to be referring to 2 Peter 3 a good bit over the course of the next few days. But in 2 Peter 3, as Peter continues to assure his readers that yes, Jesus is coming again, he tells his readers, including us, about what happens to the material universe at that time. In 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 10, Peter writes, "But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up." The heavens will pass away with a great noise. The heavens will pass away with a great noise. The very elements will melt. The heavenly bodies will be destroyed. So how are we supposed to measure time at that point? It's a trick question. We don't measure time at that point. Time is over at that point. Time will be at an end. On more than one occasion during his ministry, Jesus made reference to what he called the last day. In John 6, he talked about raising up those who believe in him at the last day. In John chapter 12, he talked about the fact that his words will judge people in the last day. Well, if it's the last day, how many come after that? A day is a measurement of time. And one day there will be a last day. Time will come to an end. All roads ultimately lead to eternity. And Jesus alluded to that fact as well. Not only that one day there will be a last day, but also that life will continue after this life is over, after this world is gone. Think about the parable of the rich man and Lazarus from Luke chapter 16. Now, I am aware, and I'm sure many of you are aware, that there are some that make the case that this is not a parable but a description of an actual event. Not my purpose to get into that discussion here or now. I'll just note that if it is the description of an actual event, it still proves the point that I want to make right here. And the point has to do with what parables are. I mean, most of us are familiar that a parable is where Jesus would take some, for lack of a better term, real world event, some reality, something that we see happen that we know actually does take place, and use that to illustrate his lesson that he's wanting to teach. Sower goes out to sow. Okay, well, yeah, that's something we see happening. That's something that actually happens. Okay, well, in Luke 16, Jesus tells this parable about a rich man and Lazarus who both die, but they end up in different places. And the lesson that is being taught from this parable is that your status in this life does not necessarily indicate your status in the next, which means you need to think about that. That's the lesson. What is the reality that Jesus uses to illustrate this? What happened to two different men after they died? This parable lets us know that to the Son of God, eternity is a reality. And life after this life is over is a fact. Now, I do take note that also in this parable we learn that life in eternity will not be the same for everyone. But I'm going to leave that alone for now because we'll be talking more about that tomorrow night. But all roads lead to eternity. We die to the flesh and to this world. And of course, even if we could somehow figure out a way not to die in the flesh, most people have, but we will still one day be dead to this world in this life because all men and women eventually leave this world in this life. Maybe some of us will be around when the Lord comes. And even then we will be changed and we will become dead to this world in that sense. We will simply join those who have already crossed over to the next state of existence. We're going to talk about that more Saturday morning. The fact is, though, even if we could manage to somehow remain in the flesh, eventually we wouldn't have anywhere to live, would we? We read from 2 Peter 3 about how everything's going to be destroyed. John notes in 1 John chapter 2 that this world is passing away. Any way you approach the temporary nature of this life, you find again, all roads lead to eternity. And when we reach eternity and our particular eternal dwelling place, there will be no changing of that status. Any changes of our trajectory in eternity need to be made while we are still in the flesh. It will be too late once we have made that transition. We're going to be referring to Matthew 25 a good bit over the next few days as well. And in Jesus, as he speaks of the fate of those that he counts as righteous and those he counts as unrighteous in Matthew 25, he talks about separating them out, and then he notes that some, well, in chapter 25 and verse 46, he says regarding the unrighteous, they will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Now the word, again, New King James, the word translated everlasting, the word translated eternal, same word. So they're interchangeable. Eternal, everlasting. Your status won't change once you've gone there. The state that you place yourself in when you enter eternity will be an eternal, will be an everlasting state. It will not change. It will be the state of your existence from that point forward forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Amen. One more reference to Peter before we close things out this evening. But in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 11, having just noted that the material universe will be destroyed when Jesus returns, leaving eternity as our dwelling place, Peter asks, therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness? You know the end is coming of this life. You know that you will live forever somewhere when this life is over, when that inevitable end comes. So Peter says, what does that tell you how you need to be spending your time while you're still here? You need to be thinking about eternity. We all need to think about it, and far more, I suspect, than many of us do. We need to live life with a view to its approach. And I hope that the studies that we engage in over the next couple of days will help us all to do so. For now, I will thank you for your attention and invite you to get ready to sing the song that has been selected for us. We never want to close out one of these assemblies, though, without offering the invitation of the Lord to any who have need to render obedience to the gospel. And I'll just say this in closing tonight. If you are not a Christian, if you've never named the name of Christ, been buried, immersed in the waters of baptism, based on your faith in Him for the remission of your sins, you are not ready for eternity. Now, we'll be talking more about that as we go on this week, but you just need to know that right now. And you need to correct that. And you can correct that. Now, I didn't look back here, but I'm pretty sure we've got water to accommodate you. And if that's your desire tonight, we would love to help you get ready for eternity. If you're a child of God, that you've been baptized, you've been a Christian, but you know I'm not ready either. You need to make things right with God. If it's something that requires the help of your brethren, if it's something that requires you to acknowledge something before your brethren, we're here to help you as well. You are among friends. We want you to go to heaven. We hope that you'll take advantage of the opportunity that is before you right now and that you will come, even now as we stand and sing together.